Hi, welcome back. Today is going to be our official first lecture on an introduction to calligraphy. We are going to learn throughout this first session how to use a command line, or what we also call a shell application, and we are going to install and use the Git commands within the command line. So, depending on whether you are using a Mac or a Windows, the settings, the configurations, the installations might vary. Throughout the entire course, I will be using a Mac, uh, but in the lectures themselves and the references, you will find instructions on how to do the same thing with Windows. Okay, with the proper installation throughout the course, there will be slight variations because we are, going to use emulators on Windows machines or any other operating system, but eventually they will all end up being very similar in terms of usage and in terms of configuration and setup. The course on GitHub is very well organized and structured in a way to give you all the instructions that you need to use calligraphy on either Windows or Mac. If you are using Linux, if you are using Unix or any other operating systems, I believe, and it's a fair assumption to make, that you will be able to extrapolate based on either a Mac, on how to do things with a Mac, or on how to do things with a Windows machine. So going back to our lecture, I am currently on the GitHub page for introduction to calligraphy. The course outline that we saw last time is all in here, as well as all the references to all the lectures throughout this course. You also have references directly from the Udemy software, or the Udemy environment that you are using. You usually find these links directly under the videos, and you can check them out over there. Okay, so let's dig into the details of what we are going to be doing today. So if when we go to the GitHub of the course, we hit the get started, and now we have the different lectures, the different references to each of the lecture. The lecture we are going to cover today is lecture 2. We're going to be talking about the command line and Git. So let's go and take a look at what's within the references, because a lot of what's mentioned in that lecture you are going to be doing by yourself on the side. We are definitely not going to spend the time for the time of the lecture to set up command line and Git, but rather I would rather spend the time to show you how to use them, to show you some basic commands that we are going to be using throughout, and in some cases and how to set them up in a way so they are more usable and more accessible to us. Okay, so over here, and I'll speak a little bit about the documentation or the reference that we have. So it's in two parts. The first part is about the command line, or what we also call the shell application, and the second part is really about how to include Git within the Git program within your system. Okay. Um, we are going to go ahead and start with the command line. The command line, like I mentioned earlier, is also called a shell application. It's really a short for command line interface, and what it really is, it's another one of those programs, but it's not. It's without a graphical user interface. It is a program that allows you to interface using commands directly with other applications, or even with your operating system and your file system on your own machine. Now, it might sound a little bit outdated to you, especially with all the graphical user interfaces that we find today. But the reality is that the command line, or the shell application, is one of the bare bone, very first layer of application that can be on an operating system. Okay, so it allows you to do things that potentially or eventually with graphical user interface you might not have either the permissions or the privileges to achieve. So for more elaborate interfacing with the operating system and with the kernel of your machine. Of course, having something like a command line or a command interface or a shell application is definitely more powerful, but also faster and more efficient. For as long as this course is concerned, we are going to use the command line or a shell application specifically of course, to deal with with file systems, such as creating directories and folders and files and things like that. But we are mainly going to use it in order to interface with GitHub when we start talking about GitHub later on, through what we call the Git commands. Okay, so the primary reason why we want to use the command line is one, interfacing with the GitHub, and at some point we are also we also need to clone some codes or transfer some codes to GitHub, or even in some cases unpack a compressed folder or a package, and in order to do all of this, we are going to use a shell application. So what is a shell application and where is it in our systems? Let me start with Windows. For Windows in particular, you do have something very equivalent to a shell application, and this is really what we call the command prompt in Windows, but it's not powerful enough the way we need it. So it doesn't allow us to do some bash commands, and I will talk about bash in a while. So bash is one of the most popular types of command interfaces. Okay, and it's some form of an OS language that is primarily used in Linux and therefore on Mac as well. For Windows machines or Windows systems in general, they have another language that is a lot less powerful than than Bash, than a Bash shell, and it's called the command prompt. Okay. However, it's not enough for this course to just rely on the command prompt that's within Windows. So this is why we are going to ask you to download a program or an application called Commander. And what Commander does, it emulates a Bash shell. Okay, so it becomes a little more uniform to what Linux and what Mac systems do. Okay, now this will also help us and it may make it a little bit easier for all of us in this class, whether we're using a Windows machine or a Mac machine, to kind of use the same language and the same commands. So having same type of application to use would make both the lectures easier to understand, but also it would help you see the examples in a more lively fashion. And everything that I'm going to talk about in this course, since I am using a Mac, even if you're using a Windows, you'll be able to replicate a lot of the examples that I'll be doing in the course using this commander. So if you click on the link that is provided in the reference, you get to download it, and then we'll explain later on through instructions how you could unpack it, unzip it, install it, and do the configurations on it. Okay, so that's for the Windows. For Mac or for Linux, specifically for Mac, in the case of our course, it's actually it comes integrated directly with your operating system. You have a Bash shell application that's called Terminal. Okay, if you have not used Terminal before, it is one of the items that you can find in your utilities under applications. So if you go to applications, utilities, you can find it. Or a quicker way to do it is really to go to the Spotlight, just like I'm doing right here, and you can type Terminal, and it's going to give you the Terminal app, which the icon of it looks a little bit like this. Okay, so when you can double click on it. And here I am right now in a terminal or in a command line under a Mac system. Okay, so now what is this going to help us do, and what are some basic commands that we're going to use throughout this course? Okay, so by default, when you go into the terminal, especially if you have not done any configuration on it, it is going to take you to what we call home, okay? And home is usually represented by this tilde over here. So right now I can say that I am home, and it always shows you the user who is currently using the system, because you could very much be dealing or interfacing with the shell with different users. Okay, in this particular case, this is my first and last name, so I am the actual user. So any file or any folder or anything that I do right now is authorized under this user. Okay, so what can I do now with this shell? And there are many types of commands that we're going to look at. I'm going to give you some examples, but the reference has a lot of others that I would strongly encourage you to try them out. Okay, unless of course they're destructive actions, then watch out when you're doing things like this. I don't want you to lose files or anything like that. So in order to avoid having you to go through the whole documentation in order to understand what is useful for this course, we're gonna slightly do it together, and I'll point out the things that you absolutely need to know. Okay, and I'm actually only gonna show you the things that you would need for this course in particular. All right, so there is one basic command that is called cd, cnd, like that, okay, which really is a short of change directory. So right now I am in the home directory, and if I would like to change and go to another folder, I would use the cd along with the name of the directory that I want to go to. Okay, now let's look at, we will use cd in a while, but before that it would be good to see what's in that directory, or what's in the home where I am at right now. So there is another function, which is a listing function, that is ls. Okay, so if you do ls, you get a list of all the folders and files that are contained within home in this particular case. Okay, so you can see I have movies, pictures, sites, applications, library, which really is a typical Mac home folder. All right, so ls is going to be very useful to you guys. There is a slight modification on the ls, so you can add properties to it to say show me all the archived files, or show me all the hidden files. So if I do ls -la, is really going to give me some more details about each and every folder, and it's gonna also give me all the hidden files as well. The hidden files in a Mac environment and also in a Linux environment, they always start with a dot. So everything that starts with a dot is a hidden folder or a hidden file. Okay, so by doing ls -la, you get more details about the folder, so you don't just see them like that, but you also have dates. You also have the permissions, which is going to be very useful a little bit further in the course. And if you look at the permissions of this, you can see that some of them are writable, some of them are just readable, and so on and so forth. Okay, there's also the size of either the folder or the file, okay, which is here. And the third column that you see in here is really the user who owns either the folder or the file. So by using ls -la, you are always going to be able to identify whether you are, and by you I mean the user that you're using is really the owner of the file or the folder or not. Okay, because in some cases you might hit some permissions problem that is telling you cannot achieve or you cannot complete a certain task because you don't have permissions for it. Then in that case you might be or the system might be used either under a different user, or it might be the root and you are the user. So I could be Dory, but if I want to make modification to .bash profile that's here, then in that case I don't have permissions. I need to be using the root user or the root permissions in order to be able to act on these folders or these files. So how do I use these? Or how do I get myself into using the admin permissions or the root permissions? There is a global method called sudo, okay, or command called sudo. By adding sudo to anything, so any other bash command, you'll be able to have the permission to do it. Okay, so if I wanna, well, no, it doesn't work necessarily for change directory, but if I want to access the direct, well, it's not that .bash profile, which happens to be a file. So in order to access it and to make modification to that file, you need to add the sudo command to it. I will show you an example in a while when we see more commands, okay? And I'll get back to that point. So that was sudo. So far we know change directory, we know the listing, we know two variations of the listing. Great. Now, is there a way for us to create a directory? Yes, there is. So and the command for it is make directory with an mk. So let's make a directory together and call it test. Okay. So now apparently it all went well. So now if I do cd test, because cd is change directory, which now I am telling my command line to go to the test directory, which is under home, and you will see that the home tilde switch now to test. So now I am in the scope of the test folder. Okay, so if I do ls, it should be empty. Great. So now we created the directory, and everything we can do from this point on. Let's do it in the test directory, in this test folder, in order to avoid any other mistakes. Okay. Now, if I want to just create a file, okay, without necessarily writing anything in that file, okay, so let's go ahead and create a file that is called test.txt, just to say that it's a text file. Okay, so how do I do that? Now there is a very handy command that is called touch, and by doing touch, it's as if you're saying I want to create a file. Okay, so you can do touch test.txt, and it's going to create an empty file for you. So if I do ls or ls-a, ls-la, you see now I have my test text. Awesome. So far we created the directory, we have a file in the directory, that file is empty. So if I go ls-la, it should be of size 0. Okay, if you look at it in here, all right, it's size 0. Okay, and I am the creator of it. So the owner is Dori.ar. Great. Let me now show you if I want to do the same thing. We're going to do with sudo. So I'm going to do sudo touch again, and it's going to be test2.txt. You need to enter a password, okay? And that should be your admin password, whatever that password is. Sorry, I entered it wrong. And here we go. So now under test, if I do ls-la, look at the difference. Test has been created under the user Dori, but test2 is under root. Okay, great. Now let's go and add something to that file. We're not going to go into the command. There is a command called echo, which allows you to write directly into the file, but I would like to introduce you to something else. There is an equivalent of a text editor that you could use with the command line. There are several ones. There's Nano, there is Vim, and some others. I would advise you to use Nano, at least for this lecture. We're not going to use it necessarily after that, but at least for this one, it's easier to use maybe than Vim. So now I would like to access Nano and tell Nano to go read test.txt. So and we're going to go with test.txt, not test2, just to start with. So we're going to do Nano test. And I'm going to show you a nice command over here. If I write test dot, and I don't feel like typing anymore, if you hit the tab on your keyboard, it would complete it with the first occurrence that it knows that matches what you're typing. Okay, this makes the typing a lot easier with the terminal. So let's do nanotest.txt, and we get into a new space in here, which is really the nano space that is a text editor. Okay, if you look at the bottom, it tells you a little bit what commands you need to use in order to do certain things. So in order to exit, for example, you need to use Command X or Control X. Control X on a Mac. Okay, that's mainly the one we're going to be using. So let's say in here in this file, we're going to put I don't know. Let's say hello world. Okay, this means nothing right now. And I'm going to do Control X on my keyboard. When I do that, it's going to ask me, do you want to save? And I'm going to type Y and then hit enter. All right. Now, ideally, my my nano has some info in it. So if I do ls minus la, test has 12, 12k or 12 bytes in it. Okay. Great. So now my test has something in it. And now, can I read the file? If I want to read the content of the file, there is something called cat, C-A-T. So if I do cat test dot txt, then it gives me hello world. Okay, so use the cat. Mainly use it for smaller files. If it's a long file or an image file or things like this, you might end up with long text and strings that go over and over. So use cat just to look at things very quickly. It is definitely not the way to read to read a file properly. Okay, now so let me now try and do the same thing. So test2.txt. Okay, I can't. It's an empty file. Let me try and go to nano for this. Test2.txt. Great, and I'm gonna do hello world from admin, from root. I'm gonna try and save it by doing Control X again, hitting the yes, and pressing enter. Okay, look, it's telling you error writing test.txt permission denied, which is expected in this particular case because we are not under our user, and nano has been created by root. Okay, so how do I do this? I could use sudo nano text2.txt. Now, if I do hello world from root, okay, and I save it. Now I can save it. If I do cat text2.txt hello from root. I think I added a new file by mistake and we called it text2 instead of test2, and we put the hello world in it. So how about we learn how to delete test2? Okay, so how do I remove a file from this? Note that test2 is under root. Okay, root is the creator. So in order for me to be able to remove, I definitely need to add a sudo to precede it with a sudo. Now, how do I remove? The command is rm. Okay, so I can do rm test2.txt. And now if I do ls-la, I no longer have test2. But we still have the text that we created. So if I do text2.txt, this is hello world from root. Okay. So we learned how to change directory, how to create a file, how to make modifications to a file, how to remove a file. We learned about sudo. You already got a great deal of things to work with. Okay, how to create a directory, and eventually towards the end I'll teach you how to remove a directory because it has a slightly different thing. Now, what if you want to rename a file? So text2 over here, we would like to rename it to something else. So again, it's owned by root. So if I do sudo, and the command for renaming is actually moving, it's mv. Okay, so I do mv text2, and let's rename it the right way, test.txt. And now if I do ls-la, notice that now it's test.txt. Now I did the big mistake is I kind of overwritten my other file, and that's okay, at least for this particular case. You probably don't want to do that mistake again, but in this case, since it was a sudo, it didn't give me any notice or any warning, and it immediately deleted it. Okay. Now if I do cat test, it's gonna say it's from sudo. Great. So here we go. Now it's the root. Great. Now let me show you, what if I want to change the owner of this, and I don't want it to be root. I want it to be me. Okay, so there are two commands that can be of interest to you. If at all time you want to know who you are, you would say who am I, and it tells you dori.hazar. Now over here you see it, but in some other contexts you might not see who the user is. So it's if you type who am I, then in that case it could do it for you. Okay, so there is a way to change the owner, and the way to change the owner, you absolutely need to use sudo in this particular case, and it's the chown command. which is change owner, and I'm going to say I want to change the owner of test.txt, and I want it to be, and let me see if I remember that correctly. We want it to be, who am I? Sorry, it's like that. txt. And now if I do ls minus la, now it became Dory. So what did I tell it? I said change the owner and make it whoever I am test with the name of the file. And this automatically changed this test.txt and changed the ownership to me. Okay, why do you want to do this and not use the root permissions? The root permissions give you a lot of privileges to do a lot of things on the operating system and on the file system and so on. Okay, in many cases you do want to limit the scope of what you can do by user in order to avoid any big mistakes that could completely destroy your operating system, or even when you are doing more web programming or web commands like that, it would avoid your system being hacked in general if you only use the root permissions. So it's more of a security reason. Great. So now we have a directory, we have folders in it, we know how to change the ownerships. Let me show you now how you want to delete the test. Oh, actually, how do you want to go back one level up? So if from here I want to go one level up to home, I would do cd space ... and now I'm back to home. Now if I do cd test, it takes me back to test. If I go back one more, it takes me back one more. Okay, let's make another directory now inside test that says this is a subfolder. So sub folder like that. Okay, if I do ls minus la dash la, I don't know why I say minus la, it would be test.txt, and then you see this one is a directory. Okay, so if I do cd subfolder here, now I am in the subfolder. Okay, but you don't know where it belongs to. So sometimes you need to understand where this subfolder is, because everything that the application is showing you is really the last the last node you're at, the last folder you're in. It doesn't show you the whole path. So is there a way for you to see it all? Yes. So you can always, anytime, in any folder that you are or in any context that you are, if you do pwd, it's going to tell you which directory, what present directory you're working with. Okay, so in this particular case, this is the path. I'm under users, Dory, test, subfolder. Okay, so this can become very handy in order for you to know the path, and then in some cases you might want to copy it and take it and use it somewhere else. So what if I want to go back right now to home directly without necessarily having to go back and back and back? Okay, there's one fast command that says cd and tilde that takes you back to home. Okay, that can be very useful. So let's go back now to test, and notice now I'm going to change a little bit how I'm changing my directory. So I'm going to do cd test / subfolder, and I'm completing with the tab. So I just have to tap sub and then tab on my keyboard, and it completes it for me. If the folder does not exist, then when you hit the tab, nothing happens. So let me show you that. Let's say if I'm trying to do cd test / Dory, which is a folder, or do, and I hit tab, you hear the sound. I don't know if you hear the sound, by the way, through the microphone, but if you don't, then you notice nothing is happening. However, if I do sub and I hit tab, then it completes it for me, and I can go directly to that. Okay, now ls minus la, it is an empty one. So now if I want to go back, I could also do this / this. Okay, this is take me once back and twice back. Great. All right. So this I believe gives you a good understanding of of the command shell. The last thing that I want to show you is how to remove this directory entirely, and it's a slightly different syntax than removing a file. So this one belongs to Dory Azar, so I'll have the right to remove it if I want to, and it is the remove command again. But this time, what we need to tell it is remove it and remove everything that's under it, no matter whether it's a file or not a file, or even if it has subfolders in them, I want you to remove it all. So in order to do that, you need to use the attribute tab and capital R and then the name of the folder, and this will remove it. So if I do now ls minus dash la, I no longer see it in my structure. Okay, so dash R is really to recursively remove everything that is under this folder. Now, before we finish, there is a couple of commands that can become handy to you. I'm gonna clear first. So there's something called clear that clears the screen for you. That is very handy. There are some accelerators that are interesting. If you use the up and down arrows, it takes you back through all the commands that you typed throughout the session. So if I do up, that was the last one I typed, which is a clear. Then the previous one was ls, then remove, then ls, then cd, and so on. This can become very handy, especially if you're doing repeated tasks. But it will become more handy when we start using Git. Why? Because there are some specific commands that we keep repeating over and over again. So it can help you do them very quickly. So if you just want to have access to the immediate last command that you used, you just do one up, one arrow up, and then you'll get it. Down will take you to, in the reverse order. Super. Something else also that is very handy, because I cannot definitely teach you all the commands. You have the references, but in some cases you might remember the command, but you don't remember the syntax of it. Okay. So it is very, I think, handy to know that you could do this, for example, and then I think this, like that, or help. Well, it depends. Huh? No, for CD we don't have it. Oh yeah, we do. Okay, so if you do cd-help, it would give you, the typical usage of it. Okay, for things that are more complex, you could do this and then help. It gives you very quickly what you could do with it. Sometimes you could do this. Nope. What is it to get help? Yeah, well, either dash question mark or dash help. You type help and then you get the help on a particular command. Okay. In some cases it might be more elaborate than in others, so I could do this, for example, for Git, and it will give me everything that I can use in GitHub. You can also do Git and this, and again, in some cases it might work to do just question mark without anything, and it might expose more information to you. Sometimes it might be double dash and help. Now you get a more elaborate help. So if I do same thing, cd and help, well, in this case cd is a very small function, but in the case of bigger application, it could be either one dash for smaller short help, or it could be double dash, and then you get a long explanation of the help. Okay. Now that I slightly mentioned Git, let's get to Git. So what is Git? All right, Git is a program. It's another application that can be used in the terminal, and in some cases there are some graphical user interfaces to it as well that have been developed by third parties, but otherwise it really is a program that lives in your terminal, and that allows you to do version control on your on a particular folder or directory that you create. So what is version control? Version control is a way to track and log all the changes that, or all the versions of a certain file or a certain folder. It's nothing more than that, by the way. Okay, you might hear Git and so on, but really the whole point of it is to be able to track changes on a particular file or on an entire structure. Now, why do we want to track the changes? Sometimes it's for your own purpose. If you're working alone and you just need to make sure to have a copy of the different versions that you're doing in order for you to either revert to some previous versions if something happens, or if you want to just keep an eye on what sort of progress you've done, then you might want to use something like it. In a more realistic scenario, Git is primarily used from the moment there is collaboration on a particular either file or folder. It is very helpful in a programming world. Why? Because you might have bigger teams and big number of people all using or all having access to the same source code, and a bunch of people might be working sometimes on the same file or sometimes on different files within a folder, and at some point it all needs to come together to build an application. Whatever each and every person is working on, when it all gets combined, it will become the final code that will be published. Okay, so there is a need to keep track of what everybody is doing, and most importantly, to identify any potential conflicts. So if, for example, two people are making changes on a file and they happen to make changes on exactly the same place in the file, or changing the exact same thing in the file in different ways, then in that case, Git, a program like Git will be able to identify those conflicts and push you to get together somehow and figure out which version you would wanna keep and which version you wanna stash away. Okay, so this is really the principle of what Git is about. Now, in our case, especially in the case of this lecture, you are going to use it just because it's an industry standard. I can't believe that you want to get into the coding or the programming world without knowing Git. So that's definitely one goal. The other goal is really to be able to interface with a cloud repository. So just to have a backup of your code in the cloud in order for either me or your peers or anybody else to see the code that you worked on. So there is an online Git repository called GitHub, which we will see in the next lecture, that allows you really to have a copy of your local files directly in that service, so on GitHub, which will be the primary repository, and then you could always upload any changes that you make directly in there, and from the moment it's there, it's accessible to anybody that want to clone it, or that want to use it, or that want to download it from that public repository. All right, so this is exactly what Git is. Git is the series of commands that will allow us to interface with any GitHub service or service like GitHub, which are those services that make your repository accessible to a general public, and where there is a chance for team collaboration and people making changes to the code. Okay, so how do we download GitHub? I will not go through this lecture on how you could do it. I will start with Windows though. On Windows, for Windows there is a particular package that needs to be downloaded locally, and once it's done, then the configuration and the settings are all the same across both Windows and Mac. So I advise you to read the instructions to get Git. In the case of Mac, it's a little quicker, okay? I'll go to the terminal and show you. So I already do have Git installed. But in case you do not have Git installed, all you need to do is just type Git, okay? And if you don't see this, then in that case, you do not have Git. What you're gonna see if you don't have it, and I actually advise you to type Git, but to get the version. So in order to do this, do git -- version. In my case, it's installed, so it tells you what version I have. And in your case, if it's not installed, then it's gonna ask you and it's gonna prompt you to install it. Okay, so follow the instructions. Say yes to everything that will get downloaded. It's gonna ask if you want to do it through the Xcode terminal. Please make sure to download the Xcode terminal as well, and follow the process. And once it's done, come back here and type Git again or Git version, and then you should see something like what I have. Okay, now once you do this, there is a set of primary things that you need to do that are described in the reference. Okay, but I'm going to show you the output of them once you've done them. So if you scroll further down in here, there are some global configurations, which by the way you only have to do once. Okay, and from the moment you do it, it's persistent. And it will be used for any Git folder or Git repository that you create. Those are global configuration. One of them is defining what your username is, what your email is. Okay, those are relatively basic. Then there are things that are more display related, or basic configuration settings that might act either on the UI that you see, or on how you want to handle certain things. So color.ui is one. This is just saying that it would be good to add a color code mechanism to make a distinction between what is committed to production and what is not committed. In other words, what is still local and only you can see, versus what has been uploaded. And we'll get into the details of all this terminology in the next round. Okay, so this would allow you to have to see them in color. So I'll give you an example, because I have something that is already in here that that gives you. So if I do git status, which you will learn in the future, so notice notice how it's red right now. If I do something on it, if I act on it, then it might take a different color. Okay, so this is just for an example to show you what the output of this is. Then there is something called the file mode. Okay, the file mode is in many cases you might change the permissions of a file in either the directory that you created. Let me go back, see if I still have the test, of if I deleted it. I deleted the test. Okay, see test. Yes, we deleted it. That's okay. So if you might want to change the permissions of a file and change the privilege level of it, which I will show you how to do at some point. Then in that case, you do not want to track those changes. Why? Because what you do locally on your machine may not apply to other people who are using your code. So you don't want necessarily the attributes of the privileges or the permissions of the files to be transferred and backed up. So in order to turn that off, you need to show this command. Okay. The other two, or the other last one that is a part of a configuration, but we have it for both Mac and Windows in slightly different fashion, is really to apply what we call the how Git handles the line endings in a certain file. Okay, the line endings in a file can be different depending on the operating system or the application that is used. In the case of Mac, they have line endings that are different than in Windows. So this kind of tells Git to autocorrect it and to make it consistent for everybody else. So for no matter what operating system you come from, you're always going to be able to read the files. So you need to run that command in order to make sure to make it agnostic to the line endings agnostic to an operating system. And again, you just have to do it once, and Git will handle it for you across the board. So let me show you a little bit now what it should look like eventually. So if you do git config and lists, I might have done it wrong, sorry for that. Git config list, you get all these configurations. Okay, so everything that was set up, you can see it in here. So you see, core file name is set to false, the name, the email, and the color UI is set to true. Okay. Well, now going back to the references, if you go back to the lecture, we do have a Git cheat sheet in here. If you want to go and take a look at some commands, you might not know how to use them just yet, but I don't want you to worry. And you have the same thing for the command line. There is a cheat sheet as well that will give you a lot more commands than what we covered today. So try them out. Try to try them out in a separate folder in order not to make mistakes, and have fun. Okay, this is just the beginning. We are just setting up our environment in order for us to start coding and start the real fun. With that, I wish you a good day, and then I hope to see you next time.